Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, a podcast where I talk to performers about what comedy means to them. Sometimes their answers are short, sometimes they're long, but always they're fascinating. And whether they're household names or the yet to be discovered, they bring us laughter. And in my small way through this podcast, I hope to say thank you. You can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. If you like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a force of nature with a powerful zeal for their work. She's an energetic performer of what she terms pole comedy, combining stand-up and pole dancing in a brand of semi-surreal alternative comedy. She co-hosts the Alternative Comedy Memorial Society and at the 2023 Edinburgh Fringe debuted her first full hour of pole comedy. It's stand-up and pole comedian Siân Docksey.
I can introduce myself and start at the beginning if that's helpful.
Yes, of course.
Hi everyone. I'm Siân. I'm from Belgium and I'm a pole dancing comic, writer, messy witch, weirdo. I've really set up my stall now as pole comic, and that is the thing I'm most interested in doing. So I became both a stand-up and a pole dancer by accident. Both these things happened very much outside of my control, and I've been combining them since 2022. So that's what I've been working on, really. And before that, the stuff I was doing was more surrealist stand-up. So my first solo show was about me turning myself into a lemon. I don't know if you saw that. It was a very obscure...
I didn't see it, but I am aware of it because it has a fantastic title.
Oh, God. I can't even remember the title. That show also, like, it had the worst poster design. What was it? Hang on. Siân Docksey's totally casual and freewheeling mystic comedy lemon torpedo.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. Beautiful.
The design is horrible. Also, the whole setup was insane. So that show was meant to be a 45-minute show. It ran anywhere between 25 minutes and 55 minutes, depending on how it went. No, I'm kidding. Like, it was usually 50 minutes, but I had one just catastrophic one, which was a lot shorter. But yeah, and then I did some other more surreal stuff. Like I did a show in 2018, which was about me telling my mom that I was the MC on a cruise ship. And to maintain that lie, I had to create videos with the audience during the show of me MCing on this cruise ship. And then the whole show got eaten by a whale. But then it was also kind of about living in a queer commune and late capitalism, blah, blah, blah. And then I was thinking about this yesterday because I really want to finish it. I have a show that's not complete, which is about trying to impress an octopus. Yep. It's an hour of that. It's trying to get the octopus to come to the venue. And it's sort of about babies and climate crisis, because what was happening, not like to this exaggerated extent, but truthfully, is I stopped getting invited to baby showers because I'm too negative about climate change. So my flex was to go, okay, well, let's abandon the human species. I'm going to be friends with an octopus instead. And that's the show for an hour. And yeah, I'm annoyed that one isn't finished. I made it with my friend Jake, so Jake is a creative tech and a comedy tech, but partly because we're just really good friends. We always like kind of make stuff together. Yeah. He teched my pole show in Edinburgh, and also my friend Kelly, who is this extraordinary pole dancer, acrobat, circus person, general creative genius. She's in it as well. Yeah. And I feel frustrated because I feel like the show has had one or two drafts, but it's not finished. But yeah, that's the more surreal stuff that I was doing before. And now I've moved into pole comedy as its own thing. It's not just me. Someone else has the domain name, the pole comedian, a really great American pole dancer called Amy something, and Jay Lafferty, great Scottish stand-up, has also been combining comedy and pole. And I feel like the next thing that's going to happen within this is a lot of clowns are going to realize that pole is just another toy that they can play with, and they'll do lots of interesting stuff with it, which is cool. I will also envy them because clowning is not my strong point. I'm a stand-up who then moved that onto the pole. And there's like some clowning, obviously, because it's a bit of a blurred boundary between like, well, what's stand-up-y, what's clown stuff. But yeah, I mean, but that's really cool as well. I love that there's this explosion, and also that it won't just be me, because it's been very lonely trying to do
it. You said you kind of got into comedy by accident. So what was the accident that put you on the stage?
Oh yeah. Well, so I grew up in the suburbs of Belgium, and I went to Cambridge and I started doing a biology degree because I always wanted to be a writer, but my parents, maybe not incorrectly, went, there's no money in that. Do a science degree and you'll be more employable. So I went, well, fine. So I went to Cambridge, with honestly like not really a lot of knowledge about comedy. My parents don't really like comedy stuff. They find watching the poll so much less uncomfortable than watching me do stand up. It's just like, it's not their thing. Yeah, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, I think growing up we watched, like, my dad liked Red Dwarf, which was fun, and my mum likes The Vicar of Dibley, and there was a bit of Ab Fab, but I don't really remember, like, and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that was like a big one. But yeah, comedy wasn't really a sort of like big thing at home. And I always really liked it. Like when I discovered the Mighty Boosh, I was like, like, all right, cool. Yeah, holy fuck, this is it. But yeah, I kind of went to uni to start this biology degree and wanted to do writing stuff. Then I had a complete mental breakdown and I had to take time off and go home for a while. And then I came back to uni on a different course. And I was kind of like knocking around, trying out little bits of sketchy stuff and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I auditioned for a Footlights thing. If you went to Cambridge and you do comedy, people always ask like, oh, did you do Footlights? And I applied twice, but was never on the committee. I did like shows with them. But yeah, I think honestly, I'm kind of just like a bumpkin from the suburbs. I didn't really think of stuff in this sort of quite, I respect this, like kind of like careerist way of, oh, for comedy, you do the Footlights at Cambridge. I had no fucking clue. But yeah, so anyway, I was auditioning and like I did a few like surreal sketches things as part of those shows, and I auditioned something for a Footlight show that didn't get in. But outside the audition room, there were two guys who said, hey, we're doing a fundraiser comedy show for a rape crisis center. Do you do stand-up? And I lied and I went, yeah, sure. Because that's really close to my heart. And I don't know, there was just a sort of goblin in my brain that was like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. So I wrote a 10 and it wasn't good, but it was fun. And I've been using the same material ever since. No. But that was the first time I tried stand up. And honestly, the early stuff, you know how with some comics, when they do their first bit, people are like, that's exciting, more of this. No one thought that of me correctly. Like it was very sort of run of the mill. I did the kind of cringe thing also of, I think every slightly quirky girl in comedy has had a sort of like ukulele phase where you do just like little songs about dating and stuff.
Yeah.
People love it. Like I think, like I was enjoying doing stuff, but it wasn't like, oh yeah, this is like exciting. Like it was like a woman learning how to do jokes. I would do some stuff that feels a bit more me now. Like I'd kind of like cover myself in post-it notes about the material and sort of like muck around with it. But yeah, but through doing that, my best friend Zoe, who was also at Cambridge Uni, she was running a comedy night at her college because Cambridge has this bizarre kind of feudal system like colleges. And I auditioned and in a way that's very flattering. She then basically decided that I was going to be her friend, and I've spent 10 years making her regret that decision. But yeah, we started doing stuff together. We basically wrote our first show over Facebook Messenger because we were just like mucking about. I sometimes feel sad that I only met Zoe before our final year at uni, and we did a ton of stuff in that year. We did our first show, and then we did our first like hour of sketch comedy, and then we did another compilation show, and then we did some she did a lot of radio stuff as well, so we did some sketchy bits and pieces for that. But we just kind of became glued together, partly because just like effortlessly we just immediately bonded. And I'd been in I'd done some sketch writing before, like I'd kind of been in other like, hey, let's write some sketches together, but It really is the thing of when you find someone who, I mean, Zoe's the funniest person I've ever met. She like makes me laugh constantly. We have an unpublishable, like ongoing WhatsApp chat. She's super talented. Yeah, that's kind of then when I felt like, oh, cool, let's do this. And then we both then moved to London, as is the kind of really cliche pipeline. And we did a couple of Edinburgh shows together. Our first show was Chaos. It was called Endings. And the premise was that we were going to have only the endings for sketches, no beginnings or middles, which is what we wrote in the Fringe program submission, and was then completely unrealisable. Also, it was on the PBH Free Fringe. It was at 12 p.m. on the top floor of a nightclub, very in a venue that sometimes had chairs. Will they have chairs today? We'll find out. We don't know. Yeah, it was really fun, and like, yeah, we've done, I don't know how many shows. Many, many shows. But that was fun. It was also nice to start like post uni doing comedy stuff that way, because as I'm sure people have complained to you endlessly, it can be very lonely doing comedy stuff like this. And like my kind of close friendship group in comedy is people who me and Zoe connected with through doing sketch stuff. So we became really good pals with another surreal weirdo sketch double act called Simon Tom, and we ran a night. It was like insanely short-lived, incredibly intense, but very, very fun. But yeah, there's like stuff that you get from sketch comedy, which is really fun in terms of just like having a team. And yeah, and I guess it's also, you know, I only sort of realized more when we moved to London that the stuff we like is like the Mighty Boosh is a huge part of it. I also like, I love Reeves and Mortimer, who are kind of, you know, they kind of set the precedent. Like I think the smell of Reeves and Mortimer is still just like the best TV. And also like early French and Saunders stuff. I was just thinking about that today. Their early stuff was weird. It was very like, here's a strange idea. And then some stuff that was like half written and half just like people doing weird faces and making noises, like super strange. But really fun. Yeah. So but yeah, so that was the accidental doing stand-up. I auditioned a sketch thing for this gig that didn't get in. And then was asked if I do stand-up and I lied and I went, yeah. And now, God knows how many years later, it's sort of what I do. Also, all of this is by accident because I never really considered being a performer. I always wanted to be a writer. And what's happened is like I moved to the UK because I was like, I want to be a TV writer. And then suddenly was doing stand-up. And now I'm a pole dancer and I'm kind of like, what the fuck's happened here, guys? But there you go.
But you have written for, I mean, you write a lot. You've written for radio and, you know, you do script editing and
I wrote a short film, which I'm very proud of. And I'd like to do more of that. I'm always complaining that I've sort of let that side of, I mean, career, rolling bin fire of activity that I've sort of let that go to the side. Yeah, and at uni I wrote lots of plays. Actually, when I had to drop out of uni, I wrote a play that then got shortlisted for the Harry Potter Prize, which I don't know if they still do that, but that was cool, which is about two kids TV presenters accidentally making a kids TV show in like a mental rehabilitation center. Mark, it was not clever. It was not. It was quite a crass set of gags about my mental breakdown. But content. Yeah, and there's still stuff that I would like to do. Yesterday was my birthday.
It was. I know. I said happy birthday.
Oh yeah. I'm on it. I spent a lot of it talking to a company about the warranty for my laundry machine repair. So I felt mid-30s, we're go. Let's do this.
There's nothing I love more than people 20 years younger than me complaining about reaching middle age.
I had a thing where like I a few years ago got a job in a bar. I was like just in between jobs, wasn't making any money from comedy, and my day stuff with like copywriting had dried up. So I was like, yeah, no worries, I'll work in a cafe. And everyone else who worked there was like sort of 22, 23, and I was 29. And when they found out I was 29, the look of confusion and pity was so weird. Like they found out how old I was, and they were like, oh, but you look great. And I was like, my friends, yeah. Like, I was like, you're going to be around for a long time. Well, maybe not that long because of climate crisis, but yeah, it was baffling. One of the nice things about being queer is having intergenerational friendships. I mean, a lot of people have that for other reasons, but I've really noticed it in queer social circles that it's just very normal to have social groups that range between people being like 19 and in their 70s is just like a regular thing. And I had a friend who he commissioned my first comedy club, so I had this incredibly spoiled experience of starting to run a gig where we had like budget and backing and promo, which was wonderful. But he would sort of look at all of us little flailing millennial queers who would get tied up in knots about like, oh, the language of the Facebook event isn't very inclusive. And he kind of went, you didn't survive the AIDS crisis. Pipe down, you little minions.
Oh, yeah.
I've noticed myself doing that a little bit with the TikTok kids who start doing their Edinburgh shows. I was talking to one of them he's really funny, really talented. He's brilliant. And also, this really pisses me off, he's incredibly nice, so I can't even like properly berate him. But a guy who writes sketches with a good friend of mine, he was just talking about the Fringe, and I was like, oh, so it was your first one, how did it go? And he went in a completely non-boasty way that it was great because they didn't have to do any flyering or any promo because the TikTok audience came in. And I just went, don't tell any other comedians that.
Yeah.
All the hours of flyering in the rain, trying to get people to come to your free show with your soggy flyers, and then going, no.
Yeah. There's nothing quite so humbling, I don't think, as people who get all this amazing critical acclaim, and then you see them on a rainy street corner begging people to come to their show.
Yeah, my favorite thing in Edinburgh is usually when I was going up with Zoe, so I used to be in a sketch double act, which was the first way I did the Fringe, apart from one chaotic uni project like years and years ago. But me and Zoe would just be out there flyering, and all of these just like fresh-faced, eager, beaver-eyed little kids would bound up going, hello, do you want to see our version of Romeo and Juliet? It's set in Alice in Wonderland and it's about abortion and drugs. And I'd be like, oh, are you doing a drama degree? And they'd go, yeah. And I'd go, I did a drama degree, look where you could be. Saw the future just collapse in front of them.
Yeah, quite right.
Yeah.
That's what the Fringe is all about, crushing dreams.
Totally. I mean, I'm very interested in talking about the commercial pressures of comedy stuff versus the freedom of it. Because, I mean, I feel like, every generation can be a bit bitter about like, oh, they had it so easy, which is not true. Like everyone has a different context. But I do think that we're in an unusual crunch on creativity with the cost of living crisis and how things have kind of twisted a lot in show business and arts to have the expectation on artists in any medium to generally do things at our own like egregious personal expense. And it's really, I think it has really impacted like what you were saying about like doing a set and it being just totally untethered to commercial aims or whatever, but just doing it for a laugh. There should be room for that. And I just, for the quality of creativity and also just the enjoyment of people doing stuff, I worry about the feeling of constantly being strained by just how hard it is to do anything at the moment. Sorry, that's a bit of a bleak point, but I think it's important to address. I mean, so Zoe is doing a lot of scripted writing stuff at the moment, and it's going well. I had a few things that were knocking about with different development producers and It's just a bit the same thing of you have to do so much stuff for free, and like you'll be doing rounds of development, and if you're lucky, something gets options. There's some paid development on it, but I like an aim for probably more next year, to be honest, than this year, is to like get another pilot, like just try to shop it out to people. But yeah, you're constantly slightly just monitoring the dials of your time and energy and like what you have capacity to do. Like there's a short film I want to write with my friend Jane Edwards, who's a great surrealist comic based up in Manchester. But yeah, a lot of stuff about comedy and gigging and is and now especially I'm including the poll is a lot of your time gets eaten up by the things that balloon out, like the admin, the travel, now kind of needing to build an online presence. And also the overwhelming majority of us are doing other jobs as well, which is fine. Like most artists have other day jobs. You know, I think it's also a thing of if you make a choice as well to do the material that you want to do and think about that as priority instead of what can I sell to people, then you've kind of bought into that. Although I don't know, I feel a bit like I think that not everyone, but I think that if you're doing stuff that's of value, we should be paid for it. It's not that these places are utopias by any stretch of the imagination, but I still have a few friends from Belgium and from France, and they're constantly rolling from like grant to grant. Like there's a lot more public finance in Germany as well. We obviously have Arts Council funding in the UK, and then there's other funding sources, but there isn't as much a culture here of just financing creatives to keep doing stuff creatively and not need to earn the money. Like oh God, it kind of makes me too ill and sad to think about it. But when you talk to people who were there at the like burgeoning alt comedy scene in the 80s and 90s, and they'll talk about things, and you know, obviously they're not giving you the whole picture, but they'll talk about things like being on an artist grant that meant as long as you did like one kid's birthday party a year or something, you then effectively had a sort of dole, which meant you just had all this like breathing space to write, to play, to experiment. I just like, it's such a loss that we don't have that anymore, because it's a squeeze to figure out how to stay like employable enough that you can pay rent, bills, etc., you know, vegetables, all the stuff you need, and then also still fight to retain enough time to actually make your work. Anyway, sorry, that could really expand as a thing, because I think about it a lot.
The problem is that people who pay for things see it as a business, but people who enjoy the things see it as an art. So it's like you were talking there a few minutes ago about things like Reeves and Mortimer and Mighty Boosh. These programs on television, everybody watched these. So someone had to take a chance on saying, I'm going to invest in this. People my age still regularly quote Monty Python at each other. The BBC commissioning editor had to sit down, watch this and go, I have no idea what you're doing, but here's some money. Go do it, play with it, see what happens. Whereas these days, more and more, the people who have the power to commission or invest in these things don't see a financial return on it immediately, and therefore they hold tightly onto the purse strings. You know, the conversation I have with comedians, Edinburgh is becoming more and more and more expensive for people to go, particularly to perform, when you've got to pay for not only the accommodation, which is like the lion's share a lot of the time, and for the audiences as well. But you know, you've got, apart from free fringe perhaps, but you've got venue costs, you've got tech costs, you've got flyering, you've got printing, PR. Is the industry being priced out of existence?
I think there's a collision of lots of unfortunate things. There's less commissioning budget, and so I mean, the Mighty Boosh is an example, and obviously I don't know every bit of the ins and outs of their process, but I think they're quite a good example of when BBC Radio 7 was still a thing. People like them would be brought in and essentially a little bit of budget thrown at them so they could like mess around in a room for a while and write some stuff that then a broadcaster would share. And it was also just less expensive to rent for a month up in Edinburgh. And there was more budget for, I mean, you know, they weren't doing things on a like glossy HBO budget, but that's kind of why it's great as well. And I think they were afforded support for the gestation period to make the show that good, because it went from these like sketches on, you know, like obscure radio stations to then a paid radio show, which then was a TV show. So by that time, the material and also their working relationship and their dynamic was so established that the stuff was great. I don't know. I kind of just don't want to go into a doom hole about it, but less commissioning budget, everything is more expensive. Like my friends at the moment are all freaking out because their rent is going up by a third. Like that's, and it's a difficult time. And I think that people will often kind of go like, oh, but isn't that material? It's like, no, you can't do stuff without resources, fundamentally, or you just plunge yourself into debt. And I think that is it's a huge ask. Anyway, but I was thinking in terms of Edinburgh, I felt like I feel like I've slightly been on the side of Edinburgh just before it got like exponentially expensive. So for example, the show that me and Zoe did in 2015, and we're both like, like it's weird if you go to Cambridge because you meet people who are so galactically wealthy that you're just a bit skewed in terms of privilege. But, we're privileged middle class girls as well. But we could do an Edinburgh on like a shoestring budget and it'd be like, cool, this won't harm us. And also you're finding your feet. That's another thing is that creativity requires mess. Yeah. Like it needs experimentation and it needs things to bomb and go down corners. So, in 2015, we were still doing a pre-fringe show. I have a friend from school who lives in Edinburgh. So she had a spare room and then a sofa. And I think we paid her something honestly like 250 quid each and just kind of took it in turns of who was on the sofa for 1 week and who was in the spare room for another one. Also, we were babysitting a lizard. That was our fee. That was a lovely lizard. Who hated our show. Whenever we rehearsed it, this lizard would pointedly just go to the other end of the cage and just scowl. So not a fan. But yeah, I felt like, so I went up with a solo show the first time in 2017 and then 2018. So 2017 was the Lemon Show and then 2018 was my cruise ship muckabout show. And my intention with those shows was to be a better comic by the end of the Fringe than I was at the beginning. And I published my costs in 2018. Because I live in a spreadsheet. I think when I calculated all of the like sunk costs in terms of Fringe registration program, publicity, God, what else? I didn't have PR for that. I did it all myself because that wasn't the aim. The aim was just to like be there and do things for an audience. Rent, I was like renting, it was like 400 quid to share a bed with my dear friend Leslie, who co-runs Troy Club. But yeah, I think, and then when I offset that with just what I took in bucket takings, 2018 cost me 500 quid, which is kind of unheard of. Yeah. And then we had the pandemic. A few friends now are kind of like horrified that those figures are unrecognizable. And I like, at that point, and probably kind of still now, like, let's be honest, I'm an act with very little like profile or anything. I was just doing everything off my own back of like, get decent poster design and then just like flyer really hard, do what you can, try and approach people for like features or whatever, manage your expectations. But for me in 2017, 2018, I think really abiding by what I think is a good way to be a comic, which is just like, just keep doing runs of the festival as often as you can. And you will just like, you figure out your craft through that. And, Edinburgh, whole other conversation, Edinburgh has a huge amount of flaws. And I feel like it's like the tightening it makes you feel as an act is really, really toxic. But it is the most incredible place to experiment and to figure out a show and to just also like put stuff in front of people. But yeah, I really, really felt that like I kind of had the experience in the sort of before and after. Like before, I mean, it was very difficult in the sense of modern, God, who am I? But like, if you need another like job or career, like I tried the thing in London of being like, I'm an artist, so I will work in a coffee shop 2 or 3 days a week and then do other stuff. Honestly, I couldn't really afford it. I then had to be like, no, I'm going to work in comms for whatever, It's hard to lock down a job if every July you kind of announce that you're like, oh, I'm going off to do Edinburgh, and you have to like restart again every September. So that was still, but yeah, I still felt like I kind of got that experience of my aim with Edinburgh is to be doing comedy better by the end of the festival than I was at the beginning, with obviously the caveat that everyone by the end of the Fringe is the shaking husk of who they once were. People still find ways of doing that, but it is much, much, much harder. And like when I went up last year with the Pole show, so my day job in 2022 is I was in corporate. I was a copywriter for the Dutch postal service, and I took on extra projects outside to be able to have a savings account that was just Edinburgh 2023, because I've learned the hard way with Pole that you can't do it like on the free fringe as I would have done as a stand-up, like in a venue where your stuff's kind of tucked away to the equipment, which is my livelihood, and just the setup that you need. It was like it needed to be in a professional venue. And also, like, I know that there's a lot of like mixed views about like the big four. The Pleasants were like incredibly supportive of me in terms of safety, all of this stuff that I needed for the Pole show to work. But also, like, I'd been kind of developing the show over 2 years as well. So with Edinburgh, I was like, I'm gonna pay for this properly. So I had a deposit on a professional venue where I knew that I would be supported. Also, just basically, I didn't want my like 700-pound pole stage to just be in a back room where the fucking Loughborough Improv Society or whoever would just like trash it. Like, no. And also, you know, I paid an excellent publicist $2,000 to go, okay, well, features and reviews, which meant that, like, this is such a like boasty, like swish hair movement, but my website now is covered in 5-star reviews, which I earned, but I also bought them. Basically, you know, if you pay for a publicist, then you are paying someone else to do the labor. Like it's very much like that's the market of it. But for me, like, I really felt a change of intention in my Pole show, because my like Edinburgh 2023 it felt a bit more like business-like, for want of a better word. I was kind of like, I mean, I was still like playing with stuff over the course of the show, but it was very much like, I've come here with a product and I want to hit the ground running, and I want it to sell and I want it to work. And I kind of like, to a certain extent, that was a choice, but also to a certain extent, it was like, it's gonna be like pricey to get up here. So I want there to be some tangible rewards. And I mean, I had the year before, so I got an Arts Council funding grant to upskill as a pole artist. And then also the show that I took up to Edinburgh, I'd run it at Camden People's Theatre before as an experiment, as like work in progress. And it was like, can pole dancing be funny? So I'd kind of done some of the stuff that other people would maybe find during an Edinburgh run as well, of like, let's play with these, But yeah, I was really proud of the show that I did. And also I still back the way that I did it that way. Like, I would have been really miserable coming to Edinburgh at this expense of, you know, venue, accommodation, with like a half-finished show, with like the added physical difficulty of the pole. I felt like for the nature of that project, it just needed a slightly more like business mind. It was honestly a very different Edinburgh experience. And I'm hoping to go back up this year with a stand-up show. And I feel like I will be a lot more free. There was partly a thing of like, I don't have an athlete background at all. So to make sure I could sustain a whole month of pole dancing, I would do, like, I co-hosted a couple of ACMSs, and I did one late night experimental art thing with my friend Sean Morley, the Glang Show, like Sean's experimental thing. So the Glang Show is an experiment in giving the audience too much power. So Sean hosts he hosts a show. Sean is amazing. He's based in the Netherlands now, but he's a really brilliant alt comic who used to be based in Sheffield. I think he's like truly like unique. And the Glang Show is it's one of his babies. Basically Sean will like host a show of a kind, but as the audience are coming in, they're all given a ping pong ball, and if you have a ping pong ball, then you are a Glang, and the Glangs at any time can redirect what's going on in the show. So anyone in the audience could put their hand up and be like, okay, you two swap personalities, or you attack them, or do the show in French, you know. And that's part of the chaos of it. And I, as a kind of separate thing, I'm basically obsessed with pole dancing as stuff with too many legs. Like, I've covered octopus now. Pole spider is something that I really want to keep developing. And I basically wanted to be a pest in the Glang Show, that like I was there, but not really as an act, just this spider that was trying to build its web and was like, wait, what are these people doing? So I did that for one night in Edinburgh, and I got ill the next week anyway, but I learned the hard way. I was like, this Edinburgh, I can't just do like experimental late night things because just the stamina isn't gonna work anymore, which made me a bit sad because part of the fun of Edinburgh is to, be doing these like weird late night mixed bill things and other stuff. And like I really had that in 2017 and 2018, and also when me and Zoe went up before, where to promote your show, you're going out and doing all these things and you make a lot of friends and like you do all these kind of like fun things. Like last year when it was just me and the Pole Comedy Show, I felt a bit like siloed off from the rest of the festival because I was, in a way that is honestly professionalism, I was being very disciplined of, it's costing me so much to be here and it's a hard show to execute. Me taking care of myself is the most important thing. And also I was like lucky that because it had a marketable concept and Flick Morris, who did the PR, is incredibly good at her job, the show just kind of sold itself as well. Like I didn't have to do flyering or anything, and every room was pretty decent sized, like yeah, but it was a different experience. And yeah, I think when we're talking about the kind of financial overlap, the thing is you can't, I mean, I would love to be able to keep like hemorrhaging money on art. That doesn't work.
Well, let's talk about the poll. I mean, I saw your show last year at Edinburgh.
Thank you for coming.
It's a wonderful show.
Thanks.
Unlike anything else that I've seen. And we mentioned Jay Lafferty. I saw her show as well, but she didn't spend the entire time on the poll. But she did 90% stand up and then a finale, if you like, whereas you were 90% on the poll. So what made you take up the poll and what made you want to put that with comedy?
People told me it wouldn't work and I'm so obnoxious that I went, right, that's what I'm gonna do. Yeah, it's honestly a bit of a collision of things. So poll, it's another thing that came into my life by accident. So I moved to London when I was 23. And me and Zoe shared a flat together, and then we moved to different places. And so we were doing these sketch shows, and I was doing my own solo stuff, and blah blah blah. And I was also trying to like send scripts to people and we're trying to get more into like TV stuff. And I was doing that for a few years. And when I was 25, I got to the final stage of 4 different job interviews for things that were like, a PA to, not like the head of comedy at Channel 4, but someone in the office at Channel 4 Comedy, a different media thing. Essentially things that were like, hey, I really want to learn how this industry works and be paid to work there. But anyway, I got like to the final stages of 4 separate job interviews and didn't get the job. And I was working in a bar the rest of the time to like, earn money while I wasn't in a day job. And I was working in this bar where sexual harassment was just part of the job. Like it was a thing where the people who ran the bar didn't intervene because that was part of what keeps people buying pints. And you basically, like, if you were a young woman, you just got told like, well, then don't wear makeup and wear baggier clothes if you don't like it. Like that was the only help that you got. And one evening that got so bad that something in my head just snapped, and I went, okay, if this is going to happen anyway, I'm going to make some money out of it. So I started working in a strip club. And at that point, like I knew a lot of sex workers just through like social stuff, and I lived with people who happened to be full service sex workers. So stripping was kind of like the Diet Coke of sex work in my head. It didn't really like register. I obviously didn't tell my parents. So that's how I started pole. I couldn't do any pole before. I don't think I'd ever really seen a pole like before my audition. Like the first pole thing I'd ever done was auditioning for the job. And so that's kind of how pole started. And then as I was still like, stripping a little bit but doing other stuff, I started going to really quite like informal like pole classes. Like I didn't go to a pole studio until like 3 or 4 years after I'd started pole dancing, like for money in strip clubs. But yeah, I went to like a queer pole class, and then also a Skillshare one run by like strippers for other strippers. And then like a really nice woman in the strip club that I worked with, the one that's on the same street as Soho Theatre. To Mark, my plan in terms of a linear career path is to work in every establishment between Sunset Strip and Soho Theatre. But yeah, just a really nice woman who was a dancer there, who was a great pole dancer, would just like teach on Monday mornings in the club for a tenner. She really wasn't making money from this. It was just out of the desire to help the other women make more money and just like teach pole. She was amazing. So pole was this totally separate area of my life that was very much, it was not the plan at all. And then also, but then when I stopped like dancing, like in strip clubs, I kind of kept pole separate because it's like, I'm evangelical about this and I wang on about it all the time. It's been like the best thing for my mental health. I love pole. And it was also just this kind of sanctuary, like, you know, when you have a hobby and it's just like yours and but then like I was doing it so much. And also when I kind of made the leap of just on my own social media, like I have a separate like pole account stuff that's just for pole. But I, you know, would occasionally show a picture of me like mucking around on the pole. People very kindly would say like, you're really good at this, which was lovely to hear. And obviously, you know, it's very flattering because pole is just like showing off as well. I can't even remember who it was, but I kind of, someone suggested like, would you put pole into your comedy stuff? Oh yeah. So over 2021, through annoying circumstances that are too boring to go into, I ended up back in my parents' house in Belgium for what was meant to be 2 or 3 months and ended up being nearly a year. And market was horrible. I've got no nostalgia about this period. Like my day job collapsed. I was still, you know, I would do odd bits of like copywriting and marketing stuff, but essentially like my day job had just dried up. The comedy industry obviously like dissolved, like everyone's work just fell between their fingers. And I was just like in my teenage bedroom going, what's going on? And the thing that stopped me from going bananas was once a week I would take a pole class on Zoom with an amazing dancer called Sasha Diamond, who I don't know if she's teaching anymore, but and it's what stopped me going mad. And she was like, mix pole with comedy. And I kind of went, no, because it's my refuge. Like it's my kind of safety space. But then I sort of started floating the idea. And then what really made me do it is I floated it to a few people who went, oh, that won't work. And I went, okay, well then that's what we're doing because and but honestly, like I've been really, really hesitant about it for reasons that became the material that I would unpack in the show. Pole is it is so linked to stripping and sex work that you're in an area of discussion about feminism, about bodies, about like what has currency in society that it's really interesting to talk about. But I was kind of like, no, I do like goof about surrealism. What about my octopus show, guys? Like and I just and in the first version of the pole show that I did, which was called Work in Progress, like I pitched that to Camden People's Theatre because they have I think it's yearly, maybe it's not, but they do like an open call of, do you want to try out an interesting different idea? And I don't know, I just, you know, I guess it was one of those weekends where I was just like, fuck it, let's email and kind of see what happens. But I pitched them a show as this thing of like, can pole dancing be funny? Because we see sexy and funny as mutually exclusive. Not all pole is sexy, but that's what people's like stereotype is of it. Of it's like strippery, it's dancery. Also, like it's true. Like central pole is a huge area, and it's why a lot of people start doing it. And then there's also the gendered thing of still a lot of the received idea of what a comic is someone in a suit, not necessarily a man in a suit, but often a man in a suit. Anyway, so I just pitched Camden People's Theatre an idea, and they took it, which I was very happy about. And then I also applied without really believing I'd get it, because every Arts Council funding bid I'd made before hadn't worked. My friend Lulu, who I co-host the Pole podcast with, I feel like twice a week I just tell her like, Lulu, my personality is I'm applying for funding. Like that's just like, that's who I am. But yeah, I applied for a developing your creative practice grant with Arts Council in their dance like a field, which was mad. I was like, what? I've got no like dance background or anything. I did like a theater foundation course, but I even in comedy, I feel like I'm much more of a like writer type comic than sort of like movement, physical theater person. So it just felt so obscene and delusional to apply for Arts Council funding for dancing. But basically then I got this grant, and it was that thing of, it's weird because the money felt like a confirmation of being taken seriously and feeling like this was valued. There's a whole other area of discussion about that. But yeah, and so that really helped me do the first show.
Yeah.
And then essentially, and again, I was very touched that people said this, but other comics, especially my friend Alexander Bennett, who ended up directing my pole comedy show, they were supportive in the sense of like, you're doing something really interesting. And also they'd be like, and this is more interesting than your octopus show. Sometimes in moments of wild entitlement, people kind of go like, well, what's your mission statement as a creative? And I thought like surrealism is my specialist subject. I was like, I use surrealism to make difficult political ideas or personal stuff more fun. I was like, I'm a surrealist comic, that's my thing. But that doesn't seem true anymore. Now it's like, okay, it's Paul, you know, and I kind of can't help but be a bit of a weirdo. Yeah, so that was a roundabout way of explaining where the pole show came from. It's been really interesting. The other driver artistically is the best advice I've ever been given about creativity is discomfort is where the interesting material is. And that has helped me so much as a stand-up, like in scripts or everything. Like if you have discomfort about something, that means it's juicy. And the discomfort people have with the idea of pole comedy, and it in a nice way. I mean, I get a bit of a kick out of this because it's just really flattering if it's like, oh, people are interested in what I'm doing, finally. But there's often a bit of a, like, if I say that's what I do, there's a bit of a processing of like, wait, what? Like, but pole, but with like da. But then there's a discomfort around like, oh, but will it be like too sexy for comedy? Or kind of like, oh, but will it be not sexy enough? Like there's a real kind of like confusion about what this is. And that's been the really interesting space to play with.
Yeah.
With also like, you know, the thing I like about doing the pole spider is it's just silly. Like it's a silly character that's getting tangled in its legs and it's just like, blah. And then also the seagull routine in the pole show is fun because it's literally just like, imagine pole dancing with flippers. Like what would that be like? And that's it. Like it's one idea and it's fun. The routine that always goes down best in the pole show is the funeral routine. So it's a pole dancing funerals routine. And it's basically like quite a stripper style routine, dancing through messages that are left at this guy's funeral. And I think the reason that routine is consistently the strongest is because it's not running away from the fact that pole is pole. It's really embracing a sexiness that comes with pole dancing without either trying to apologize for it or like undermine it. And I found that in the like juxtaposition of, you know, a kind of meaningful or sincere funeral statement with then me just like grinding, you get bigger laughs the more you commit to both of them. So the more I commit to it being like a sexy pole routine then within the context of the funeral, the more the audience get it. That for me is what has been really interesting, is the perceived impossibility of combining these things. Side note, like last year I was going to apply for a PhD on this and I found out that a really amazing woman called Dr. Hannah Ballou has already done a PhD on, in a nutshell, why do we think that funny and sexy are mutually exclusive? And there's so much stuff that like so many comics have explored there before. I don't think I'm going to end up doing a PhD, but it's a really interesting space to play with. Although paradoxically, so my pole show was about dread, and it is about kind of things that give me dread and trying to pole dance my way through them. The routine that didn't make it into the show in the end was one about like sexual harassment and like that stuff, because it just wasn't funny. Like it wasn't working. I had a whole routine around it called Safety Dance, which was a list of places where women get sexually harassed that just gets more and more absurd. So it starts off with like street, work, supermarket, and then goes like to pirate ship, space, and then I countered that by polling through it, partly because I kind of just wanted to do a bombastic routine with obnoxious amounts of yellow. So I had like a high-vis jacket and a safety hat and But that routine didn't work because I haven't quite found a way yet of talking about that in a way that's fun. And also like, and your internal compass on this gets better and better the more you do stuff. But I think that on the like, discomfort is where the interesting material is.
Yeah.
You get better at noticing where actually it's not for art yet. You're having a terrible time and you need to like address this in your life, as opposed to, oh, hey, here's like a universal truth or whatever, or like something that other people find uncomfortable or tricky or whatever, and you're voicing that. I'm finding that at the moment in just stand up, like the thing that I find my attention drawn to a lot of the time is like children climate crisis, and that's from like, I think I mentioned it at the show that you were at, Leslie Gould's lovely show, where it's very normal for people with a uterus, like female comics in our like mid-30s, to start talking about, it's like the fear of not having children or the fear of having children and not being able to decide which is worse, because you can like see the closing door ahead of you. And I kind of feel like, it's what is on my mind and capturing my attention. So it's like, well, there's material there. And also I think there's the thing of, if you have discomfort about something, it's wild to think that you're the only person who will have that. Like, you will have touched on something that a lot of other people will find hard, and it's cool to then be able to open that up. I also feel at the beginning of this, which is exciting and also kind of exhausting. Part of me wishes that, I kind of like, what if I'd found Paul comedy when I was 23 rather than 33, and like there being more development. But then equally, I think that, like, without wanting to sound arrogant, I think it works because of like, I had all this experience as a comic before, and then like I weaved in the pole. There are comedy categories at pole competitions. I did one last year. It was so fun. But I feel like the thing that you get from stand-up and sketch or whatever, of learning the hard way about how to perform for laughs, and also just learning like how it doesn't work. I'm now in the I'm in the excruciating new material phase of figuring some stuff out, while simultaneously warming up my usual set to go on tour. And it is it is a real like shocker of, oh god, do I have any jokes, like what the but yeah, I think having come like from comedy and then introducing that to pole, I feel like I probably wouldn't have been able to take a shortcut.
You talked about doing comedy before introducing the pole. Also, it was very collaborative. You did a lot of things with other people. And although you do comedy sans pole anyway, you talked about the pole being good for your mental health. Do you find comfort in the pole as a partner? Is that a collaboration?
No, I fucked it, Mark. I fucked it. I took this thing that was wonderful for my mental health, and I've made it into this stressful, expensive, cumbersome. No, it's kind of yes and no. At the moment, it's honestly been so nice to go back to pole classes just to learn, and also to fail. Also, I was so exhausted after Edinburgh that I just didn't really want to look at it for a while. I was like, I fucking hate that guy. No, it's interesting. And my aim is to combine the best of comedy with the best of pole. I love doing, so I did my spider routine at a pole competition, and it was so fun to get like real laughs in the room, because I thought of it as a sketch. So I was like, well, here are the beats, and it's very, very simple premise, and it was quite like clowny, but it was a sketch that happened to be on the pole. And that's what I find most fun with the pole, is kind of the pole being what creates the context and the environment, rather than this like thing in and of itself. So it's a bit of a spoiler, but with the octopus show, the way the pole has ended up featuring in that is, at the end, we do get an octopus to come to the venue, and it's my friend Kelly, who is an octopus, but who is immediately on the pole, and the audience immediately get of like, oh, it's underwater. And so the pole in a way isn't the focus. It's like, when we're on the pole, we're underwater, and it just kind of creates the environment for it. But yeah, and I think that's really exciting to play around with. But yeah, I'm like, I want to bring the best of comedy in the sense of making stuff that is like funny and also like political and surreal, and like being able to say and confront a lot of stuff with then this interesting tool. Basically, I feel like I've kind of ended up on the pathway of behaving more like a musical comic, of it's just like there's just this other piece of equipment that supports your idea. The aim is to bring the best of both. Truthfully, a lot of last year was running headfirst into the worst of both worlds. So it was, combining the expensive overheads, physical difficulty, and also just a bit of grim stuff. Like I had a really, again, it was kind of minor on the scale of things, but I brought my pole to a festival and we had like a sexual harassment thing because people get a bit weird about it. Like, and I was kind of like, oh fuck, like what have I done? Like, what have I introduced? And also like it's just a weird piece of kit, the pole. It's very temperature sensitive. I found out the hard way in my first show that if the pole gets too warm over the course of the show, you just fall off it. Like when I did the show in Camden, which is crazy. When I came on for the final routine, I like reached for the pole and my hand just slid, and it's meant to be quite an aerial routine, like it's quite high. I just had to riff like a new one off because it was too slippery to stay on the pole. So now I travel around with these two ventilators, they're called Kath and Kim, and they stay pointed at the pole to cool it down. So I mean, there's all these like strange little features. And also the pole industry is quite new. It's like, obviously it's kind of like, oh, when did stand-up begin? Like there's no one true answer. But like it's a weird piece of kit. And I was, while I was like learning how it works, I was also having to kind of educate venues programmers or these other people I was working with on like just how this thing works. And also sometimes it would just like, it would break in ways that were not significant enough to be like, well, no, cancelled it. But so for example, like the pole has two settings. It's got static, where it's just a column and it doesn't move, or spin, when it spins on its own axis. I always dance on spin. I just prefer it. It's just a preference, and I think you can do more stuff. But I had one show where it just wasn't quite working. Like it was jamming a little bit, but I just had to do the show. And it was kind of like if you're a guitarist and as soon as you walk on stage, you're handed a guitar, but 3 of the strings are missing. You manage, but it's a different craft. But anyway, so there's all this stuff that comes with the pole. And what I felt was difficult was that being combined with some of the slightly like Wild West organization and low pay in comedy. Like there's a different setup to, for example, I don't know, theater or circus. Like when pole artists work with circus people are just more experienced in, okay, cool. So there is a different kind of physical demand on this. There's a different need for, you know what I mean? Like, in ways that make it good, like is quite sparse on a lot of stuff. And I'm really old school about stand-up stuff. I'm just kind of like mic spotlight. I love that simplicity and it just being like words and jokes and storytelling. But so the aim is to bring the best of them together. Back to the money thing. The best things I've learned about marketing, producing, branding, I've learned it all from pole dancers. Like some from comics, obviously, but I think that the skill that polers accumulate just because of how the industry is structured is stuff that would be really great to like Skillshare to kind of cross-pollinate with comics. And also, I mean, this is kind of why I applied to do a PhD. There are so many things that pole and stand-up have in common more culturally. Like both are still like, they're still perceived in some ways as quite like a low art form that then has different layers of like status and prestige. So I think, you know, the first link that people make with pole dancing is still usually strip clubs. And then it's like, oh, but it might be an Olympic sport as well. Or it's like, you know, people see it now in Cirque du Soleil. So it's kind of quite slippery.
Yeah.
And I think that's a similar thing with comedy. Like people will be aware of like, oh, Catherine Ryan's going on tour and that's really glamorous. But then simultaneously comedy will be like, you know, a guy in the corner of a pub doing stuff while the TV is still on, like playing sports in the corner. So I think they're quite similar in that. I'm kind of figuring out now, like I have an idea for the next pole show that I want to do, but I feel a bit exhausted at the moment with like budgeting, producing, finance, all of that stuff. I just can't keep existing in these cycles of boom and bust, basically. Like, 2022 was all just like working flat out in a corporate job while also like developing the material, but just to have enough resources to then in 2023 have bought myself time back and resources to be like, okay, but then it's very, very unsustainable to kind of always kind of feel like you're a bit of like you're kind of starting again. At the moment, what I am trying to puzzle out is how to continue to do pole comedy, but in a sustainable way, not just these like massive peaks and troughs of intensity. So that's kind of where we're at. I mean, like, I'm so happy with the material itself. Like, I love doing it. And also, I think just because I've just got a bit more of a thick skin about it, I feel like the discomfort I was talking about. I honestly think this is like, it's kind of just having to go through like feminist arguments that people have been making for centuries about like, well, why do we think this about currency and like women's bodies versus men's bodies? And then also just like shame and visibility and sexuality, or being stupid with sexuality, like all of that stuff. I feel like it kind of opens stuff that like where it's uncomfortable, that's where it's really juicy. And then there's also, there's the part of me that is like a stupid alt comic, and I just want to like zip around being an octopus and just be like, fuck you all.
I really like this idea. I mean, I don't know if this has come up. It probably sounds a bit wanky, to be honest. I like this idea that on the one hand, you can be utterly frivolous and just ridiculous and messing around, and then at the other side of the sphere, you are talking about global things like climate change and feminism and what have you, while you are in a sense orbiting the pole. So you're talking about the global issues while you are in yourself in orbit, which I think it's interesting.
And it's interesting, and it's interesting to try and not be wanky about it or alienating, because and it's just true because it's my life. What I come back to with climate crisis a lot of the time is, in a way that's quite selfish, it can sometimes come to a decision of like whether or not you're going to start a family, when you're kind of like, God, are these kids just going to have a garbage future ahead of them? And also, can I afford it? Like I partly through choice and partly just through like, I'm just going to tell you what the truth is. It's anchored in stuff that is just personal and messy, but in a way that I hope makes it relatable and accessible, and also just not too grim. I also, like the pole stuff plays out into a lot of things that come up in relationships. Like it's all these confusing ideas about desirability, undesirability, kind of, what you mean to people. Like, I don't know. That's a bit of an unfinished thought, but but I feel like, again, at the risk of, making kind of wanky thesis, that's where comedy works in a way that I think more effectively than other mediums of, you can go very big but very, very close to home at the same time, and the craft is on people kind of coming with the journey with you. I've really loved working with Sam Nicoresti on their show about gender identity and cancel culture, because it's doing those things as well. It's talking about the horrendous hostile climate of transphobia and how that's related to late stage capitalism, economic crisis, all of this. But it's also about them having to have difficult conversations with their girlfriend about like, so which gender are we now? And just kind of mixing up the real mundane. It's obviously weird because not everyone who's someone thinking about family or their relationship is also a pole dancer. And there's also something that I think about as well is the status thing. So pole is an impressive thing to do, and it's I have to kind of condition the audience when they come in to tell them they're allowed to woo. at like, oh hey, that's a cool trick or whatever. I mean, and there's also just vanity in that. It's like it's showing off. Like there's one routine in the show which honestly is driving me crazy because it hasn't quite come together yet. But it's the one in Berlin where it's the point in the show where it's like, okay, we've had a lot of like talky jokes now. Just like let's just bash out some cool pole moves at people, and it's fun. And I'm kind of like, also, there's a part of me that's also kind of like, hey, this is people's evening out as well. I want to just do something entertaining and fun as well. Da, da, da. But I think that showing like vulnerability and skill at the same time is something that's it's something that comics do as well, because when comics do material about rejection, difficult experiences, embarrassment, and like not even things like, oh, my great trauma, because the thing is like trauma isn't as cringe inducing as things that are just more about like everyday shame and stuff, like things basically things that don't make you look good, things that make you like uncool. The skill in comedy is to do those things that make you look like a bit vulnerable and clueless, but also surround that with enough like gags and skill that the audience still feel like you're in control, that they're not going to be worried about you. And I mean, my friend Lulu is a really good example of that. Like her show was all about, like, stealing money from her gran to buy crack because she was such a like hopeless addict. But she's such a good comic that the audience stay with her all the time. And it's an entertaining hour, like primarily. Alexander Bennett, another good example of, I think, the stuff that he's doing about men's self-esteem and like masculinity is so like, oh, it's like icky and juicy, and it's so like hard to talk about. But he's a very skilled club comic, so it still makes it like fun. It's weird because I think cringe and that discomfort thing is where the juicy material is, but then you have to find places where you're still giving people a show and like you're still behind the wheel. You're not just doing therapy badly in public and being so entitled that you think people should like listen to you and get paid. And like the pole brings an interesting element into that as well, because if you're dancing for people, like, I mean, this is a bit contentious, but the origin of pole dancing is in a strip club. It's your little advertising window to show off your hot bod, so people will come for VIP dances with you. It's just a marketing window. So the intention of pole is like, I'm going to get your attention to then make you spend money on me, and then I get to close a sale. Like it's got that intention behind it. Obviously not with the entirety of pole, and like pole is so huge at the moment, and the difference in like purpose and craft from more like sensual style pole dancers to then really sort of like lyrical balletic pole dancers, or then like circus pole dancers who smash out these like incredible athletic combos. It's like people can play around with whatever bits of it they like. There was a bit of a like some sort of kerfuffle of 11 and 12-year-old girls learning pole dancing, and people kind of pearl clutching and going, oh, but is this appropriate? But they're just doing gymnastics. Like they're kind of they're basically on a bar, but it's a vertical one instead of a horizontal one. And I've seen like kids do polling competitions. Honestly, it fills me with resentment, because they're just these talented elastic bands who don't have aches and pains and debt. I think that when you're trying to do comedy to say something personal and also say something relatable, because it's not you showing off, it's you going, fuck. The pole adds an interesting layer to that, because you're simultaneously then doing something which people will interpret as like, oh, but da 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 da. And then I'm also just kind of like, fuck it, it's show business. Come on, guys, let's like do something fun.
Let's step away from the pole for a moment.
Thank God.
We've talked a little bit about your festival experience. I talked to comedians about the competition aspect of being at a festival where you're competing for audiences with hundreds of other people. How do you feel about the competitive nature of comedy, or how do you feel about competitions themselves?
Janine Haruni said in a recent interview, competitions help you get paid. I don't know. I think that I felt so kind of outside of all of that. I think I tried some competitions when I first started doing stuff. I did like So you think you're funny? Oh, and I did the BBC New Comedy Award, but like didn't get very far. I don't know. Oh yeah, I guess some funny women competitions. Oh yeah, I guess I have done a few, but I just don't really I don't know. It's weird, isn't it? Because in every line of work, you have to jump through some hoops that are meaningful to other people as like, oh, well, you've really earned your stripes. And so we said we were stepping away from the pole, but nice try. But it's interesting in terms of how pole dancers view competitions because, okay, say you're a promoter and you're booking a comedy gig and you're choosing between acts, various things will have value. So, for example, if an act has got TV credits, it's like, oh, they were on Frankie Boyle's New World Order or Mock the Week or Live at the Apollo. You obviously are like, yay, cool. That's going to look really good in the event description and people know who they are, da-da-da. Or, yeah, if they're like Leicester New Comedian of the Year award, da-da. Being able to like decorate your acts is awesome. But then as a promoter, you'll become like, who's a good fit for my audience? So, for example, say you run a queer comedy club, you might be more interested in booking someone who doesn't have these like titles or like like letters behind their name, but do stuff that will be so relatable for your audience that they're a great booking. And then there's also the thing of like who you actually think is funny. And then the basics of who will come to your gig on time and not like cause issues. There's all these things. To briefly step away, it's quite similar to Pole World where a studio owner, when they're looking for instructors, it boosts the profile of their studio if it's like multi-competition winner, da da da, or this person, da da da. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that person's going to be the best teacher. Or, I mean, I guess, the equivalent in comedy is like the TikTok kids we were mentioning. An act might not have done a load of competitions, but if they've got 50K followers on TikTok or Instagram, then your workshop is going to sell out immediately because all of their fans will come in. Yeah, I don't know. I think it kind of as an act. So, I mean, my project for this year is in a very like staggered way is I need to get a bit more online. Just so it's not, so I'm not just kind of like tumbleweed in the wild. But I'm trying to figure out a way how to do it in a way that serves my material and is fun for me as well. Yeah. So I'm kind of like, I'd like to do 2 videos a month, maybe, which anyone who's on the like algorithm police, whatever, be like, no, you've got to post every day. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. It'll be shit. And I'd rather do things in a way that I think, hey, I'll enjoy doing and is stuff that I'm like, yeah, cool. These are little sketches or whatever. Yeah. And I think it's a bit similar with competitions. If your intention is to become a jobbing comic and to get TV creds and then competitions are sort of part of that. But I don't know. I think, and also just like the landscape is changing as well. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like in some ways, if you're really going like, I'm going to be big, building up a TikTok following is a much smarter move. Oh, and similar to what we were talking about earlier with the days of yore when broadcasters would theoretically, you only hear about the success stories. You don't hear about all of the other people who, there was probably 7 or 8 other duos similar to the Mighty Boosh who didn't get kind of plucked out of nowhere, and that's just how it works. Yeah. But in a very broad strokes way that is not true across the board but has changed, my understanding is that some of what's changed about commissioning, and it's the same in publishing, it's the same in journalism, is instead of a commissioner or a broadcaster, let's say, going, there is the talent, I will take that talent and bring them to our audience. Now it'll be a bit the other way around. They'll go, who has got a big TikTok following that I can buy and bring that following to us, like to our channel? Yeah. So yeah, the ecosystem has very much changed, which as a comic, an actor, a writer, a creative person, a pole dancer, whatever it is that you do, you sort of have to be quite rigorous in like, okay, well, so what are my aims? And so where do I need to shoot? Yeah. So honestly, the way I feel about competitions is like, it's part of the landscape and different things work for different people. In a way that's probably to my detriment. I also I just don't really have a competitive streak. What I loved about doing a pole competition is immediately, and it was just so like effortless and such a nice surprise. Me and all of the other acts in the comedy category, we literally met and we just clicked immediately. We were having so much fun. So we just went like, let's have a good gig. And the girl who won, who did like, she did a really funny Super Mario routine about like Princess Peach in a really kind of like, it was like Princess Peach is going to rescue herself. And it was just really silly. But it was literally like, let's just have a good time. Like it just was so inconsequential. Yeah, I also feel like in terms of you improving your material, competitions can really work in the sense of being on top of your shit and just like having a tight set like that. And, you know, it can be a really good motivator to make better material. On the other hand, they can be really like creatively asphyxiating. It's that thing of, I think creativity needs mess, and especially comedy. You need space to muck about. And like, you know, like what me and Tom Tuck do at ACMS is we sort of like find ideas with each other, and that's really fun. It's something that I've really loved about doing ACMS with Tom, is that I'm not a confident improviser. I've like done a bit of improv, but I think a good criticism of me is sometimes I'm a bit overly scripted, and it depends how confident I am. Like sometimes if I'm not feeling great, I will slightly just be on the back foot and almost kind of like tell people the transcript of a really funny show instead of being very in the room and being willing to play around. Whereas Tom, who's a brilliant improvisational comic, he's so confident to come on stage with just like the very beginnings of some stuff and kind of see what happens in the room and like trust himself to be funny in it. And I've loved co-hosting with him for that. Like I've learned so much, and that's been really great. It's really cool when you kind of, your comfort zone is really like challenged in that way, and you have to sort of roll with the punches. Yeah, I love that show. I also I made a complete tit of myself just chatting to Fern Brady before we went on, because I'm like, I think Fern Brady does not understand how much of a fan of Fern Brady I am. So I was trying to be cool, just be like, oh, I loved your book, and then just like babbled incomprehensibly, and then went, I need to exit this conversation. So conclusion on competitions, I don't know, maybe I've said all this because I'm just bad at them, but like, I just don't really care. But I think like I understand why people care about them. I understand why they have commercial value or industry value. And I also think that, you know, if you're like gearing up for a competition, it can help you in the sense of, do you know what I mean, just being a bit more disciplined with your like writing and stuff to make sure all the gags are really tight. So
Well, what about you write comedy, you've directed Sam Nicoresti. Do you still watch comedy just in and of itself? Are you able to switch off the comedian mind, the director, the writer, and just sort of absorb and laugh and enjoy?
Whenever I've tried to withdraw, so for example, easily minimum 7 or 8 times in the last couple of years, I've gone, Shan, this isn't working. It's not working for you financially. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere. You've got a lot of skills. Be head of sustainability communications. So I was kind of like, I could be doing something very different with my life. And I just then put things to the side for a while. I just end up going to see comedy shows because I really like them. No, I love watching comedy. It's if I wasn't doing comedy, I would be at every work in progress show that's happening around every corner anyway. So I've just kind of flipped that. I think I especially love watching work in progress shows. I really like seeing the slightly eggy around the sides material that doesn't make it in, and I'm really curious about so what does make it in and why. I love watching comedy, and I definitely prefer watching stuff live to on TV. I think like, you know, I'll watch like people's Netflix specials, and I like Next Up, and you know, and I'll be watching people's specials on YouTube like all the time. I like listening to stand-up albums as well. I think that's a real craft. It's something that I now feel, because I've pushed my stuff into something so visual, would be very difficult for me to do. But no, I love listening to people's comedy albums. I need to I have a sort of like comfort food playlist slightly that is like the ones I kind of go back to. Just because, so I feel like the thing I'm constantly trying to upskill on is like just good joke structure and the real like technical stuff. So I like listening to people who are very like on their shit. Aparna Nancherla is the stand-up album whenever I'm feeling a bit shit. She has a show called Just Putting It Out There. I've honestly probably listened to it about easily we're talking like minimum 40 times. Such a good show. Why has it hit me? I don't know. Yeah, I also think that it's really fun to go and watch people who are not like you, and basically just kind of steal ideas from all kinds of different places. Like I feel that I'm this sort of weird combination of like the stand-ups I like are really old school. I love Mae Martin, I love Fern Brady, I love like Garrett Millerick is just in my head because I've like watched his show recently. Like, you know, I like, yeah, very old school, kind of water cooler stand-up, you know? Yeah. And then there's another part of me that just loves weird, wacky shit. Like Rosa Garland, I think she's trash salad. I'm obsessed with at the moment. But I'm kind of neither of those. I'm a like weird combination of both those. Oh, Michael Brunstrom, one of my favorite acts of all time, his show, The Great Fire of London, which is, so the setup of his like surrealist hour is that the fire was actually in love with London, and that's why it burned it to the ground. I was thinking about that show for weeks afterwards, but it's performance art and it'll be like weird ideas. Yeah, no, I'm like a sponge. I will absorb as much as possible. That was actually something that I was sad about at the Fringe in 2023. I felt a bit siloed off because you know, I was just like ill for the second week, so I had to maintain every molecule of energy to just, you know, around 5:30 p.m. start doing the prep for the show and then do a warm up and then do the show, and then I just kind of passed out by 9 p.m. and the rest of the time I was just like lying with a flannel over my head. No, yeah. Honestly, left my own devices, I would just see comedy all the time. Hey, it's possible. Look who I'm talking to. No, I'd like to watch more comedy in other countries as well. When I went back to Belgium last time, so the most famous Belgian comic is a woman called Fanny Rouet. She's really great. She was doing a work in progress show at a little comedy show in Brussels, and like I can speak French, so I can go to those places and it's fun. But yeah, she was doing a whip show where she had two opening acts who I'd never heard of before, and it was so fun. Like also because I used to work for the Dutch Postal Service, when I had to go out there for work, I managed to get a little spot in, you know, like in a very chill open mic at Comedy Club Haag in Rotterdam, which is honestly, you know, when you can just feel it in the bricks that these people love comedy, like that whole place. So I'm gonna get his name wrong. It's either Marcel or Marcus, but the guy who runs it with his wife, they're just diehard comedy fans. And yeah, it was so cool. It was also interesting to see comedy performed for a non-English first language audience and to see what kind of cuts through. I mean, I sort of like, yeah, sorry, at the risk of real indulgent navel gazing, I suspect that the reason I tend to do quite visual stuff and like surrealist stuff is twofold. Firstly, it's because I'm from Belgium and like, you know, I grew up speaking French and English. And so if you're in a country where there's like a language barrier, visual stuff that cuts through means that you've got more tools for everyone to follow you and to be on side. And the other thing is, like, I spent a lot of my 20s running gigs in LGBT spaces, and the stuff that goes down really well in those rooms is the weird surreal stuff. It's really interesting. Like, I used to run a queer alternative comedy club, so no, it's not like ACMS because it wasn't like experiment with new stuff. People would come with finished sets, right. But we would have like LGBTQ acts coming and doing stand-up, which always went down well. But the stuff people really went for was like Chiquita, Ali Bryce, yeah, the bizarro surrealist act. Oh, Julia Masley. They loved Julia Masley for good reasons. She's a fucking genius. But yeah, so that is a resounding yes. I love watching comedy. My life would be probably a lot more financially robust if I didn't like watching comedy so much.
Well, yeah. Know that feeling. How can we find out about you and where we can come and see you?
Best place is my website, siendocksey.com. Joining my Substack, which I've just set up, would be the main thing, or following me on Instagram. And if people not only want to see me, but want to keep me seeable, I have a Patreon where I also put up clips, work in progress stuff, blogs, show recordings. Everything is on my website, siandocksey.com, and Substack means I mail things straight to you, taking away all of that difficult labor of having to Google, where's Shan now or next.
And so finally, Shan, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
I realized that I didn't have a finished answer to this question. I have a few strands of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I think that comedy creates the conditions for empathy. And it's also, I mean, it's like Paul. No one owns comedy. No one owns Paul. It can be whatever you want it to be. Like, making people laugh is the core of it. I mean, just state the most fucking obvious point. But yeah. No, I don't have a finished answer to this. The reason I mentioned the empathy thing is kind of going back to what I was talking to you about, you know, vulnerability. I feel like comedy doesn't really work if you are showing success. I feel like, you know, coolness is kind of the death of comedy. And I felt like, especially in the stuff that I've been talking about now with, like, you know, kids, climate crisis, there's part of me that's like, Shan, why can't you just be like a cool, queer, polyamorous, just like avant-garde artist who doesn't give a shit? Like, you know, why can't I be like Peaches, you know? Like, that would be such a good way to exist. Instead, I'm just really tangled and anxious and sort of like but I think I think that uncertainty and honesty and like mess is where the real comedy material is. A friend who is a trained clown, you know, went to Gaulier. They've all gone to fucking Gaulier now, but whatever. My friend described clowning as turning shame into joy, which I thought was really lovely. Making people laugh is something you can approach from many different angles. And also it's fundamental just to goof around as well and have fun. I think in terms of like what comedy has helped me with in life, as well as, you know, like a kind of my job, I guess, is just learning to not take anything personally. Just doing your thing, have fun, see what lands in the room. Listen, fundamentally, comedy is you write down a list of things that you think are funny, and you do it in front of an audience, and they disagree with you, and then you just do that over and over again until you die. That's it in a nutshell. Killing the time between now and death and trying to have a bit of fun along the way.
Wow. Okay. Siân, thank you so much. That's amazing. I appreciate you being on with me. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me ramble. I'm very touched. I hope there's something vaguely of use in there.